why don't we start off at the end and talk a little bit about what Veterans Day means to you as a veteran all these years, what, 2-3 years after you've retired now?
No, I retired from the Army in 1987. So, I mean, I can't even do the math. It's so
We'll just
long.
Stick to several.
Yeah, several years. You know, to the extent that I grew up at all, I grew up right after the war. Matter of fact, I was born during the Second World War while my father was overseas. And when he came back from fighting in New Guinea and the Philippines, when the war was over, I was already 8 or 9 months old. Everybody in my neighborhood, I was in New York, their fathers had served. I had friends who had no fathers at all because they'd been killed in action. So the environment was one of service to the country. And we had something like 18 or 19 million people in uniform during the Second World War. So it was unusual to find some household that had not made a contribution to the defense of the Republic. Now we live in a completely different environment. Most Americans don't know anybody in uniform. And those of us who served, I served 20 years, started serving 20 years after the Second World War was over. We still had a draft. So there were lots and lots of people who served. But we all came to the same conclusion, whether we volunteered or dragged dragoon kicking and screaming into uniform, when we got to be older and recognized the importance of service. Those of us who spent time in the crucible of combat know the cost of freedom. And every Veterans Day, we think about it. Although somebody asked me not long ago, what do you think about on Veterans Day? I said, think about the same stuff I think about every day. The value of freedom, the cost of freedom, and the friends I've lost.
That's an incredible introduction of understanding. Do you feel that today the younger generations are missing that understanding to an extent of what the sacrifice actually means? They've seen it in movies, but don't have that connection.
Well, they don't have the connection because they don't serve. I think we made a big mistake having a volunteer force. It was politically expedient and remains politically expedient. But I believe strongly that if you're lucky enough to live in a free country, you owe it something in the form of service. We've made it easy for people to shirk service by, I guess, outsourcing the defense of the country to a very small number of young people who are willing to do it, not recognizing that right now there are people out there making it easy for us to have a good time. That's not the way you're supposed to run an environment in which you have freedom, because the cost ultimately will be much, much higher than national service. You're looking at somebody who believes in national service. I think it's logistically easy to do. There are schemes you can enact, which will work logistically and administratively, but we don't have the political will. Here, I'll give you something to think about. More people were killed in New York City on 9/11 than were killed at Pearl Harbor. On the 8th of December, 1941, hundreds of thousands of young people streamed to reception stations all around the country to go defend the Republic. And by the way, this was in the wake of a period of isolation when even the President of the United States said, we're not going to fight. I hate war. Eleanor, his wife, hates war. He said in one of his fireside chats, Roosevelt, Fala hates war. You know who Fala was? His dog. So there was this perception that European boys will fight in Europe, Asian boys will fight in Asia, and we're isolated from it. But yet, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, there was a groundswell of opinion to go defend the country and how important it was to defend. Hawaii didn't even become a state till I was in high school. But like I said, we had 17, 18 million people under arms during the Second World War. And that generation, my father's generation, saved the world. Today, there's no connection whatsoever. And I think it's extremely dangerous when a wide gulf opens up between those who are serving and those who are being served. You take freedom and everything that comes with it, with a complacency that's extremely dangerous and may ultimately come back to bite us.
So when you talk about that gap between those who serve and those who reap the rewards of service, many of those who reap the rewards don't quite comprehend or might have the question of what is needed to protect and what is the dangers out there that look at our freedom and want to take it away. How much did you understand that in your time when you decided to go that you're seeing dissipate today?
Well, there are two things that come immediately to mind. One is something I already mentioned, and that is that when I was graduated from university, the shadow of the Second World War still loomed very large. And that there was an understanding that you had to pay some price for freedom. You could argue strenuously and sometimes probably persuasively that the wars in which we were involved, particularly the one in Vietnam, were not existential, and there was no reason for us to go to Vietnam and all. I mean, that's a geopolitical argument that is easy to make, but certainly in retrospect, almost everything is easy. Every argument is easy to make in retrospect. But at the time, the large majority of us who served recognized that that there was something afoot that was dangerous to the national security of the United States, and not just directly necessarily, but to our political interests around the world, and we needed to address them. And then, by the way, nobody else could address them because nobody else was strong enough. As an aside, I can tell you, nobody else is strong enough now. We need to recognize that too. The second thing was the general notion of service and sacrifice, because we had experience, the nation had experience, recognizing how important it was to defend itself, even if it had to be defended at a great distance. So among those of us who served, and by the way, more than 50% of the people who served during the war in Vietnam volunteered for it. And now, again, in retrospect, when they get to be my age, they're so proud at having served, even those who didn't much like the idea of being in uniform or of getting shot at, which nobody likes very much. But the general perception that we had an obligation to do it. And it was kind of a spillover from the Second World War and the aftermath of the war, which completely changed to the extent that there was the balance of power in the world.